decision reads as we continue with Phantom. When the court returned to Telron, Erik asked that he might be permitted to remain in Mazaduran to oversee the entire course of the building. But since the Khanum would not countenance his indefinite absence, permission was refused, and consequently he was obliged to travel constantly back and forth across the Elburz Mountains all through the spring and summer of 1851. Watching him progressively grow more tired and short-tempered with each succeeding month, I sensed that the continued slights of the Grand Vizier were beginning to rankle more deeply in his mind. The enmity between the two men became increasingly open as Erik began to use his influence with the Khan to oversee several of the Prime Minister's cherished proposals. And when I saw the Mirza Fatih Khan storm out of the council chamber one sultry, airless afternoon in the summer, I guess there had been yet another heated exchange of views between them. "It is insupportable," said the Grand Vizier loudly, "truly insupportable when the opinions of a demented magician are permitted to carry weight in this fashion. How can Persia take her place in the civilized world if her affairs continue to be misdirected by the twisted fancies of this insane monster?" A terrible shush fell over the Prime Minister's friends as first one and then another turned to glance in quiet horror at the door of the council chamber where the insane monster now stood listening. The Grand Vizier followed their gaze with an expression of cold contempt, continued to address his audience as if he were unaware of Erik's presence. "Gentlemen, it is time for us to consider how much longer the Shah will contend to be served by a creature whose property belongs in a cage." I saw Erik stiffen. "A cage?" he repeated softly. The Prime Minister wheeled upon him angrily. "A cage, sir, is where you belong, and where I would gladly see you confined, like the hideous beast you are. Your pretended claim to humanity is an affront to every honest man in court." "Are there any honest men in court?" Erik's voice was slightly sarcastic and raised a little nervous laughter, even among Khan's supporters. But I was not deceived by his apparent calm. I could see from the faint tremor of his hands that he was ready to kill. "God knows there are fewer since you came," snapped the Grand Vizier furiously. "The depravity of your activity stains us all. You are neither an artist nor a scientist. You are a deranged fiend who should have been locked away from the world at birth. Your mind is as distorted as your face. I truly shudder to think that the horrendous tales are being hailed from the court to the European missions." Turning abruptly on his heel, the Grand Vizier walked away, with the members of his entourage hurrying behind him. Erik stared after him, and as I came, I was able to feel the anger that throbbed inside him like an intense swollen boil. "A cage," he said darkly. "A cage." "Erik," I said desperately, "I beseech you to forget this." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "How lightly you speak of forgetting," he muttered. "You have never known the filth and degradation of a cage." I was stunned by the pulsing venom in his voice. "They were only words," I protested hastily. Hasty, ill-considered words spoken by the heat of the moment. "I am a man with many enemies," he said softly, still staring down the corridor. He was grimly calm all of a sudden, no longer breathing in harsh gasps, with one hand clutching fiercely at his chest. And his deadly, stone-cold serenity was somehow infinity more frightening than his blazing anger. "If you are his friend," Erik continued with the same unnerving dispassion, "you had better tell that man to guard his back. Planetary alignments in his birth sign are most unfavorable. His stars are against him." He drew out a tarot card out of thin air with a flourish and dropped it on the floor at my feet. The card fell face down, and as I bent down to turn over, I found myself looking at a skeleton bearing a sight. Death. When I looked at the protest, the corridor was completely empty. There was no sign of Erik anywhere. Slowly, I tucked the card into my coat and turned away with a heavy heart. There was no more open show of hostility between the two men, but I did not make no mistake of confusing Eric's restraint with resignation. Like a prowling cat in the shadows, he was secretly and silently stalking a reckless prey. He had the ear of the Khanum, whose dislike of her son-in-law was well documented, and I suspected that whatever disaster Erik had in mind for the Prime Minister would be directed through the insidious influence of the harem. The coup fell in November when, without warning, the Shah suddenly summoned 400 of his personal guard to the palace late at night and had the Grand Vizier under his arrest. No accusations were made, no explanations given. The man simply fell from favor with all abruptness that was commonplace in Persia, plumbing it to the ground like a tangled kite and dragging his supporters with him from his wake. Erik was standing at a window, looking down the palace courtyard when the Grand Vizier, his wife, and 2 infant children were placed in a Takar Kurwan. The curtailed litter was surrounded by an armed guard, and the dismissal torchlit procession proceeded to the main gate and was soon swallowed by the blackness of this autumn night. "Where are they taking him?" I demanded. "To the palace of Finn and Kashin," he replied quietly. "Indefinite exile?" "It is enough." Erik made a brief gesture of resignation. I had forgotten there were children. I nodded and would have turned away, both relieved and satisfied, but still lingered at the window. "She chose to go with him," he said after a moment. "His wife, the little princess. She defied the wishes of her mother and her brother and insisted on sharing her husband's fate. I think she should willingly have shared even a cage to be near him." I raised my shoulder in a hesitant shrug. "Their affection is well known. Do you expect her to desert him?" "I have taken from him nothing of value," he said broodingly. "Even in his ruin, their love defeats me. I have failed." "Yes," I agreed with a sad, unthinking accent. "There's nothing you can do to destroy the love of others." There was a moment of silence, and then, without warning, Erik suddenly struck both his fists against the window with a violence that shattered the glass. "I have never accepted defeat," he shouted. "Never. And I don't begin to intend now. I'll find a better way to get revenged." As I stared at the blazing eyes behind the mask, I was suddenly afraid that I'd unwittingly set my own seal upon the Grand Vizier's death warrant. 2 months passed peacefully enough, without incident, and I began to hope that Erik's vindictive anger had cooled. The Grand Vizier remained in captivity, with the wife tasting all of his food in order to shield him from the poison that ended the lives of so many fallen favorites in the past. It was said that his fear of treachery was so great that he never left his wife's apartment for a moment, even to bathe. I thought often of the beautiful palace of Finn, with its graceful cypress venues, its marble canals full of swift-flowing water. I thought of a great and noble man reduced by his own folly to a state of cringing terror, and I reflected that even if Erik showed forbearance now, there were still many others who would lose no time in seeking the Grand Vizier's death. A fallen favorite was rarely permitted to live for long. In January, Erik left court unexpectedly. None of his servants could tell me where he had gone or when he would be back, and I was deeply uneasy. I knew he could not return to Mazandaran without me. So where else could he have gone? Several nights later, the whole palace was buzzing with rumors of the Grand Vizier's murder. I went to Erik's apartment, sick at heart and determined to wait for his return. His rooms were filled with an odd assortment of creatures, most of them injured and in various stages of recovery. A lizard limped around a small tank with a tiny splint on its rear leg. A bat with a torn wing hung upside down and eyed me hopefully, as though it expected to be fed. A cat with a bandage swathed over one eye declined over onto my lap and made my flesh cringe so badly I was forced to shut it in the marble bathroom. I sat there grimly in the menagerie of hospitalized animals and and waited to ask the question that was burning inside me like acid. Did you kill him, Erik? Did you? The story was imprinted on my brain by now. I had it by heart, every last treacherous detail except one I had to know. A lady of the harem had been sent to the cash-shen, bearing news of honorable retirement in Kerbella. Told the coat of armor was even now upon its way to him. The Grand Vizier had been persuaded to leave his wife's apartment for the first time since his captivity began. To purify himself in the bathing chambers, though he had met with the Shah's assassins, being offered the choice of death, his veins were duly opened with ritual ceremony, in accordance with his last request. The assassins had not been yet named. I was stricken with a terrible feeling of foreboding and despair. Erik walked into the room shortly after midnight. As if he were surprised to find me waiting there, he gave no sign as he tossed his hat and cloak into the arms of a hovering servant and waved the man away. "Where have you been?" I demanded curtly. "Nowhere that is any concern of yours," he retorted with infuriating calm. "It is my business to know where you are at all times. You know that I am answerable to the Shah for your activities." "Don't exceed your commission," he snapped suddenly. "I'm not a prisoner in one of your petty Mazdarin jails." I watched him ladle sherbet into a glass with a fine wooden pear spoon. "Erik," I said hopelessly, "you must know what I suspect." "How the devil should I know what you suspect?" he demanded. "I'm not a mind reader." "Mirza Taki Khan," I began hesitantly. "What do you know of this tragedy?" "I know that he's dead. I would hardly call that a tragedy." "No," I countered bitterly. "And what of his wife? What of his children?" "Yes, you turned away at that, don't you? Did you go to Kashin, Erik?" He stared at me in silence with eyes that seemed strangely sad. "Answer me!" I cried, suddenly beside myself with an emotion I could barely control. "Did you go to Kashan with his assassins? Did you?" Reaching inside his capacious magician's sleeve, Erik withdrew a small enameled cast and handed it to me. "There's your answer," he muttered grimly. "Take great care how you open it." I took the casket to an oil and lifted the lid warily. Inside, on the red velvet lining, lurked an angry black Kashan scorpion with its curt tail ready to strike. Disturbed by the sudden loss of the creature, darted toward me the raised lid, and in my alarm I lost my grip upon the little box and dropped it. I felt the sting just below my ankle and gave a gasp of shock at the searing pain. Erik moved like the god of lightning, and a second later the scorpion was screwed to the floor with the point of his knife. The same knife, I presume, that rendered the last service to the Grand Vizier. "You damn fool," he said in concerned alarm. "I told you to be careful." Pushing me into the chair, he pulled the slipper from my foot, which was already beginning to swell like an angry red balloon. I saw him hold the tip of his knife in a candle flame before he made the incision of the flesh. And then, as the notorious venom coursed through my veins, I felt myself falling. When I came to myself, I was lying on his divan. My foot was throbbing like the devil beneath a layer of linen bandaging, and the room was filled with an unpleasant burning odor. Turning my head with difficulty, I saw Erik pouring a noxious, oily substance into a vial. He came over to the divan where he saw me move, handed me a goblet, and placed me on a vial on the table beside me. "Drink that," he said curtly. I tasted copper, honey, and vinegar. The prescribed antidote, and my glance wandered to the vial. "What is that?" I asked uneasily. "The oil of the scorpion. It will relieve the pain and reduce the swelling." He sat beside me on a cane chair and laid 2 bony fingers on my pulse. "You'll live," he said with grim satisfaction. "Next time I warn you to take care. Perhaps you'll listen to me. How do you feel?" "Cold and sickened," I said grimly. He nodded as though I had merely confirmed his expectation. That was a natural reaction to a scorpion bite. "And to murder," I said. Erik sighed. "You know that there's only one way with enemies in Persia. You cut down a few yourself in your time as chief of police, haven't you? Criminals, perhaps, enemy of the state, but all by due process of law. He shrugged. Death is death, however it comes, legal or otherwise. Why do you plague me with these pointless questions? There were many cutthroats involved. The opening of his vein. I am not concerned with paid assassins. Listen, mindless, soulless animals who excel at nothing else. But you, Erik, you love all the beauty in the world. You're a genius in so many different fields. Why do you set yourself beyond the pale of humanity by such a despicable crime? He took out the mask and turned slowly to let me see. His face, which denied me all human rights, also frees me of all obligations to the human race, he said quietly. My mother hated me. My village drove me from my home. I was exhibited like an animal in a cage till a knife showed me the only way to be free. The pleasures of love will always be forbidden to me. But I am young, Nadir. I have the desires of any normal man. I watched him replace the mask warily. I did not kill the Grand Vizier, he continued unexpectedly. Oh, for God's sake, spare me a pitiful look of relief. I can assure you that I fully intended to take part. I went to the castle for the express purpose of taking his life. The mere Gazabs had orders not to touch his throat. The coup de grace was to have been mine. What happened? I demanded impatiently. Erik made a gesture of impatience. I sold the scorpion and wasted a few precious minutes on its capture. In my absence, the fools misjudged his train and opened too many veins. When I carried the bath, it was full of blood and he was already dead. I was angry. You cannot begin to imagine my fury and frustration. I hated him. I hated him for being wise and respected and loved. I hated him for making me look in the mirror of his eyes to see the loathsome thing I'd become. Erik sank back on the chair beside me and stared at the floor. Go on, I prompted grimly. You better tell me everything. I would have killed them all for their disobedience, he continued. There was too many in number and already half crazed with bloodlust. I left the vast in hate before my rage betrayed me. As I walked through the garden to my hose, the princess ran from the palace with her hair streaming in the wind. It was dark. She didn't see me until we collided. But as soon as she recognized me, she understood he was dead. She backed away from the palace and started screaming. My God, I'll never forget those screams. Such terrible, demented grief. It made me remember so many things I had forgotten. Suddenly, he buried his mask in his hands. She went on screaming. He sobbed, on and on and on. I cannot shut the sound out from my head. I let him weep, relieved beyond measure by this astounding show of emotion, the first evidence of remorse and regret which might have yet saved him. There's nothing I can do, I said in despair. I can't turn back the clock and see this terrible thing I've done. It's too late. Too late. Too late for the princess, perhaps, but not for you, I suggested with hope. Erik, have you no religion to turn to? I was raised a Catholic, he said slowly, but I have not heard Mass since I was a child. Your missions here in Persia, I pointed out gravely. Priests would hear your confession and grant you absolution. He lifted his head and looked at me curiously. You have no beliefs in the doctrine of the Catholic Church. No, I agreed, but I have a great respect for its morals. I would sooner see you an infidel than an atheist and a murderer. He got up and went to the window. The sun mass is very beautiful, he said wistfully. I think tonight perhaps I should begin to compose my own setting of requiem. I have neglected my music for too long. Far too long. I said no more. A short time later, when I was able to hobble into my own apartment, leaning on the arms of the servant, Erik was already too absorbed in the score to take note of my departure. And that's it for that chapter. Thanks for listening. See you later.